30,000 feet above the wide October sky, Samuel Harper sat in seat 16B and felt more alone than he had in months. The engines hummed like a tired old hymn beneath the floor, a steady reminder that the world kept moving even when a man's heart felt stuck in place. His daughter Lily lay cradled against his chest, her tiny fists trembling, her face flushed from the kind of crying that shakes a baby's whole body. That raw, desperate sound carried through the cabin, turning heads, drawing sighs, and filling the narrow space with a tension that wrapped around Samuel like a tightening rope. The woman in front of him shifted in her seat again. Her shoulders rose and fell in that familiar, irritated rhythm that said she had no patience left. Two teenagers across the aisle lowered their headphones and exchanged glances filled with silent complaint. A man with silver hair and an expensive watch gave Samuel a long, pointed look that needed no words. It was the look of someone who believed a crying baby was a failure of parenting rather than a simple fact of life. Samuel wiped the sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his flannel shirt. He bounced Lily gently, trying to soothe her the way he had practiced alone in his small apartment back in Denver. He whispered soft sounds, the closest thing to a lullaby he could manage without losing his voice. He tried humming the tune Caroline once loved, but the memory of her singing it brought a tightness to his throat that made the notes wobble. Lily only cried harder. The flight from Denver to Portland had seemed simple when he booked it. A short flight, barely 2 hours in the air. He had packed with careful intention the night before, folding blankets, neatly counting bottles, twice tucking extra diapers into every side pocket of the worn canvas bag. Nothing in that bag, no matter how organized, could prepare him for the ache of being watched, like a man who had lost control. 3 rows back, a woman muttered something under her breath. Samuel did not need to hear the words to understand the meaning. He had seen that same expression at grocery stores, at church, on quiet Sundays, even at the post office on the day he mailed the last of Caroline's things to her sister in Oregon. It was the expression of people who meant well, but judged quickly. They looked at a father alone with a child and wondered if he could possibly know what he was doing. Samuel lowered his gaze and tried again to soothe Lily. Her small fingers latched around the collar of his shirt as she wailed, her voice rising with a force that startled even him. He rocked her once more and murmured, "I know, sweet girl. Daddy is here. Daddy is trying." His voice cracked at the end, a sound too soft for anyone else to hear. Outside the window, clouds drifted by like pale, silent mountains. The sun pressed through them, gently casting thin rays that caught the dust in the air. The beauty of it should have been comforting. Instead, Samuel felt a hollow ache settle in his chest. He was surrounded by a plane full of people and yet felt as if he were drifting alone through the sky. A young mother across the aisle looked away as if embarrassed for him. A flight attendant began walking down the narrow path toward his row, her practiced smile polite but strained. Samuel recognized that smile. He had seen it before in waiting rooms and on busy sidewalks. It was the expression people wore when they were preparing to intervene. Lily let out another sudden wail, sharp and piercing like a plea. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence that followed. Samuel held his daughter closer, wishing he could shield her from the noise, the stares, the unspoken judgments. Wishing more than anything that he did not feel so small in a world that had changed too fast. He whispered again, steadying his voice so it would not break. "I am right here, Lily. Daddy is right here." But the truth, heavy and quiet, settled deep inside him. He was right there, yes, but he had never felt farther from steady ground. The flight attendant had nearly reached Samuel's row when something shifted in the quiet hum of the cabin. It began softly, like the rustle of fabric, the kind of sound people barely noticed on a crowded plane. Yet Samuel felt the change before he saw it. The air itself seemed to pause. From the opposite aisle, a woman slowly rose from her window seat. Samuel had not noticed her earlier, too busy wiping tears from Lily's cheeks and fighting his own rising panic. Now she stood only a few feet away, steady and calm in a way that felt out of place amid the restless irritation around them. She looked tired, Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the deeper kind that settles in the bones when life has demanded more than a person thought they had to give. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face. A little girl around 4 years old slept curled beside the window in her row, clutching a faded stuffed lamb to her chest. The woman did not smile, nor did she offer the sympathetic tilt of the head that strangers often use when they want to help without getting too involved. She simply stepped into the aisle with a quiet certainty that made the flight attendant pause mid-step. Samuel blinked, unsure whether she was coming toward him or simply stretching her legs. But then she extended her arms toward him, palms open, steady and sure. Her voice came soft but clear, carrying above Lily's cries with surprising gentleness. "Give her to me." For a moment, Samuel froze. The words were simple, yet they held a warmth he could not quite name. He hesitated, his heart thudding in his chest. Handing a baby to a stranger was something no parent imagined doing, certainly not 30,000 feet above the ground in a crowded cabin of weary travelers. His instincts screamed caution, but his exhaustion pleaded for mercy. The woman did not push. She only waited, her arms still offered, her gaze steady with a quiet understanding. The kind of understanding that spoke louder than judgment ever could. Lily continued to wail, her tiny body stiff with distress. Samuel felt the heat of embarrassment burning behind his eyes, the familiar sting of knowing everyone was watching. He opened his mouth to protest, but before the words formed, the woman stepped closer with calm, practiced movements and gently lifted Lily from his arms. The cabin fell into an unexpected hush. Even the teenagers with their half-lowered headphones glanced up. The man with the silver watch leaned forward. The flight attendant, now standing beside Samuel's row, forgot her polished smile entirely. The woman cradled Lily as though she had known her forever. She held the baby against her shoulder and began to sway in slow, easy motions. Her lips moved, forming a soft sound that carried only a few notes at first. Then, a gentle melody emerged, a tune both simple and ancient, something that felt older than the plane, older than the strangers sharing that small space above the clouds. It was not quite a song and not quite a prayer, but something in between. Lily's cries began to soften. First one quiver, then another. Her tiny fingers unclenched from the fists she had tightened in fear. She let out a small, trembling sigh against the woman's shoulder, and then almost impossibly she went quiet. Samuel stared in disbelief, his breath caught somewhere in his chest. He watched his daughter nestle into the curve of the woman's neck, watched her open her eyes once more, as if searching for someone, then close them again with peaceful surrender. 3 hours he had tried. 20 minutes she needed none. The woman opened her eyes and looked at Samuel. For a long, still moment, neither spoke. The engines hummed, the passengers breathed, the clouds drifted by outside the windows. Life continued around them, unaware of the small miracle unfolding in seat 16B. Finally, the woman whispered so softly that only he could hear. She just needed someone who was not afraid. For a few quiet moments, the world inside the plane felt gentler. Lily rested against the stranger's shoulder, her tiny breaths warm against the woman's blouse. The hum of the engines filled the space where cries had been only minutes earlier. Samuel felt his shoulders drop, the tension easing just enough to let exhaustion seep through. He had not known what relief felt like until that moment. And then just as quickly came the familiar ache that lingered beneath everything he did. A kind of sorrow that made him feel older than his 32 years. The woman continued to sway softly, her eyes drifting closed as if she were remembering something far away. Samuel watched her and wondered how she knew. Not just how to hold a crying baby, but how to carry herself with a kind of quiet steadiness that he had lost somewhere in the months since Lily was born. He rubbed his thumb along his knuckles, a small motion he had developed in the long nights when rocking Lily in the dim lamp glow was the only thing keeping both of them steady. His voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. She was born 8 months ago. The woman opened her eyes and looked at him, saying nothing, as if she sensed the rest of the story before he spoke it. My wife Caroline, he continued, letting the name settle into the air like dust floating in sunlight. She held Lily once. Just once. Maybe half a minute. Then everything went wrong so fast. He swallowed the memories, still too sharp to touch without care. The doctors tried. They kept trying. But by the time they looked at me, I already knew. The engines roared a bit louder as the plane cut through a patch of turbulence. The woman shifted her hold on Lily, her hands steady and gentle. Samuel wondered how many times she had done the same for her own child. How many nights she had stood in a dark room whispering the same words he whispered to Lily. "Daddy is here. Daddy is trying." He continued, his voice raw around the edges. "I did not even know how to hold a baby when she was born. Caroline used to laugh and say I would learn quick." He smiled sadly, a faint echo of something that once lived in him. Turns out learning quick was not optional. He looked down at his hands. They were calloused from years of plumbing work, steady hands built for tools and pipes, not for the fragile weight of a newborn who had only him in the world. 8 months, he whispered again, as if counting them made the time feel real. 8 months of holding her alone. Feeding her alone. Waking up every 2 hours because I was afraid if I slept too long I would miss something important. I kept thinking if Caroline could just see us, she would tell me I was doing it wrong. Or maybe she would tell me it was enough. He lifted his gaze to the woman. I never know which one is true. The woman's expression softened, a quiet understanding settling into her features. She glanced down at Lily, who had curled her small hand into the fabric of her sleeve. The sight made something warm flicker in her eyes. "You are doing the best you can," she said gently. "And babies see that. More than we think." Samuel drew in a shaky breath. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that Lily felt his love stronger than his fear, that she sensed his effort, even on the nights when he doubted every choice he made. He looked at his daughter's peaceful face, the rise and fall of her small chest, the calm that had seemed impossible moments earlier. 8 months ago, life had shattered. Yet here she was. And somehow, here he was too. The woman shifted Lily and offered Samuel a small, tired smile. A smile that held its own stories, its own losses. And for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt something he had not felt in months. He was not the only one trying to find his way through the dark. The woman held Lily with the gentle ease of someone who had made the same motion hundreds of times before. The rhythm of her sway never faltered, not even when the plane rocked through another ripple of turbulence. Samuel watched her for a long moment, unsure if he should thank her again or stay quiet and let the calm settle where it had finally begun to grow. She looked at him then, her eyes soft in the dim cabin light. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition formed not from words, but from the shared exhaustion of people who had been carrying too much for too long. "My name is Evelyn," she said quietly. "Evelyn Brooks." The name fit her. It carried the kind of gentle strength she seemed to hold in her posture and the careful way she rested her cheek near Lily's crown. Samuel nodded, grateful for something solid to hold on to in the moment. He glanced across the aisle at the little girl still sleeping by the window. The child's curls were spread across her small pillow, her stuffed lamb tucked neatly beneath her chin. "Is she your daughter?" Samuel asked. Evelyn followed his gaze and the faintest smile touched her lips. "Yes, that is Molly. She sleeps hard, thank goodness. Especially these days." Her voice softened on the last words, as if a thread of tenderness and sorrow had woven itself through the sentence. Samuel lowered his voice, not wanting to push, but unable to ignore the heaviness that lingered in her tone. "Is it just the two of you?" Evelyn hesitated for a heartbeat. Then she nodded. "Just the two of us. Has been for a long while now." She looked back down at Lily, brushing a thumb across her small shoulder in a slow, steady motion. The kind of touch mothers learn by instinct. "Molly's father left when she was 6 months old," Evelyn said. Her tone remained calm, but the truth beneath it was older, deeper. He said he was not ready for a baby, not ready for the noise or the nights or the way it changed everything. She let out a small breath that was not quite a laugh. Funny, he said he needed some time to think. That was 3 years ago. Samuel felt a familiar ache stir in his chest. Loss came in many forms, some sharp and sudden like lightning, others slow and silent like a door closing softly in the dark. "I am sorry," he murmured. Evelyn shook her head gently. "You did not do any of it. And besides, I learned quickly that sometimes people show you who they are when life gets heavy." She paused before adding, "I was just not ready to believe it at the time." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as a flight attendant passed by checking seat belts and offering polite smiles to passengers who were already half asleep. The hum of the engines grew steady again, like a comfort offered by something larger than all their troubles combined. Evelyn continued in a quieter voice. "When he left, I thought it was my fault. Thought maybe I had done something wrong or was not enough. I kept expecting him to walk back through the door. Days turned into months, and the only thing that walked through that door was more responsibility. More long nights. More worry." She tilted her head, settling Lily more securely in her arms. "But then Molly learned to say mama. And I realized I was the one who stayed. The one who kept showing up even when it was lonely." Samuel felt those words settle deep inside him. The one who stayed. The words echoed in a place he rarely allowed himself to visit. He looked at Evelyn, at the strength in her tired eyes, the steadiness in her hands, the quiet courage in the way she told her story without bitterness. "You did a good thing," he said softly, "raising her on your own, showing up for her." Evelyn's eyes glistened for a moment, not with sadness, but with a fragile kind of gratitude. "We do what we must," she replied. For them. Outside the window, clouds drifted apart, revealing a soft band of moonlight stretching across the sky. The plane continued forward, steady and sure, carrying two parents who had never met before, but who somehow understood one another with a clarity neither expected, and in Evelyn's arms, sleeping peacefully, Lily seemed to belong in a place neither of them had known they would find. The quiet in the cabin grew deeper as the minutes passed. Lily slept without stirring, her cheek pressed softly against Evelyn's shoulder. It was a sight so peaceful that Samuel almost forgot the chaos that had filled the row only a short while earlier. He exhaled slowly, his heartbeat finally settling into something steady. Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the dark window where faint streaks of cloud slid past like soft brushstrokes across the sky. There was a faraway look in her eyes, the kind that came from a place both tender and wounded. Samuel recognized it instantly. He had worn that same expression for months. "You look like someone who has been carrying a lot," he said gently. Evelyn gave a small nod, her fingers brushing lightly over Lily's blanket. For a moment she seemed unsure whether to speak. Then, with a quiet breath, she began. "We are flying home from Astoria," she said. "Molly and I. We spent the last week there." She paused again, her voice tightening slightly. "For the funeral." Samuel felt his chest tighten at the soft tremor in her words. "Your funeral?" he asked gently. "My mother's," she whispered. The words hung heavy in the air. Even the engine seemed to quiet, as if giving her room to speak. Samuel lowered his head respectfully. "I am deeply sorry." Evelyn swallowed hard and continued in a voice that trembled only at the edges. "She passed so suddenly. A heart attack. No warning, no signs, no last moment to say goodbye. One moment she was drinking her morning tea by the window, and the next she was just gone." Her breath caught a soft sound that spoke more than tears ever could. "She helped me raise Molly. After her father left, it was my mother who came every morning, who told me I did not need to pretend to be strong when I was falling apart." Evelyn lifted her gaze, her eyes glistening. "She was the one who taught me how to swaddle a crying baby, how to soothe her little fears. She even worked with me at the café when the days grew too busy." Lily shifted slightly, and Evelyn instinctively adjusted her hold with practiced care. She was a steady place in my life, Evelyn continued. The kind of woman who kept the whole world running with a quiet hand and a gentle heart. Now I'm flying home trying to figure out how to live without her. Trying to tell myself that I can be that steady place for Molly on my own. Samuel felt a deep pull inside him. He knew this grief, the sharpness of the first weeks, the ache that lingered through every small task. The way loss made even the simplest moments feel unfamiliar. You were close to her, he said softly. Closer than anyone, Evelyn replied. She was my mother, but she was also my friend. My anchor. The one person who never made me feel like I had failed. And now I am going back to a house that feels too quiet with no one waiting on the porch. The rawness in her voice reminded Samuel of his own first days without Caroline. The nights when silence felt like a weight pressing against the walls. The mornings when he woke hoping it had all been a dream. He looked at Evelyn with gentle understanding. You are not failing, he said. Grief makes everything feel heavier. But that does not mean you are alone. Evelyn held his gaze for a long moment. Then she whispered, It feels like the world expects me to keep going as if nothing changed. But everything changed. My days feel longer and my nights feel colder, and I keep wondering if Molly will remember her grandmother's laugh, or if it will fade before she grows old enough to hold it in her heart. Samuel nodded, his voice steady. She will remember as long as you keep telling her. As long as you keep her stories alive. Evelyn smiled softly, a fragile smile but real. Thank you, she murmured. I did not realize how much I needed someone to say that. The engine hummed steady and low. The cabin lights glowed against the quiet. And in that small, floating world between Denver and Portland, two grieving parents sat beside each other, not healed, not whole, but understood. Lily breathed peacefully in Evelyn's arms, and for the first time in many days, Evelyn's hands did not tremble. The plane settled into a smoother path, the soft rumble beneath their feet becoming almost comforting. Most passengers had grown quiet now, lulled by the dimmed lights and the steady hum of the engines. Even those who had earlier glared in irritation now rested with eyes closed, unaware of the small circle of calm that had formed around Samuel, Evelyn, and the sleeping Lily. Evelyn shifted slightly, brushing a loose curl away from her forehead. Her gaze drifted to her own daughter across the aisle, still sleeping peacefully with her stuffed lamb tucked beneath her chin. The sight brought a tenderness to her face, but there was something else too. A shadow of doubt. The kind that lives deep inside a parent who has carried more than their share of long nights. Samuel noticed it the same way he noticed the way her fingers moved absently along Lily's back, as though thinking through memories she had tried more than once to set aside. You look like you are thinking of something heavy, he said gently. Evelyn let out a soft breath. More than I should be, she admitted. Grief does that. It opens doors you thought were closed. She hesitated for a moment, then continued as if gathering courage. There was a time, she said quietly, when I was convinced I was the worst mother in the world. Samuel shifted slightly, giving her his full attention. He did not speak. He simply waited the way one waits for a truth someone has carried too long. After Molly's father left, Evelyn continued, everything felt too big. Too loud. Too lonely. Molly would cry for hours some nights, and no matter what I tried, nothing seemed to soothe her. I would pace the kitchen floor with her in my arms, watching the clock, praying for morning. People kept telling me it would get easier, but easier felt like a place I could not reach. She looked down at Lily, who slept with her tiny mouth slightly open, her breath warm and steady. There was one night, Evelyn said, when Molly was almost a year old. I had worked a double shift at the cuff. My feet hurt. My head hurt. I felt like I had nothing left to give. And she started crying the moment I took off my coat. This soft, aching cry that just grew louder and louder. She paused, her voice low. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried with her. I remember thinking maybe I am not enough. Maybe she deserves someone stronger, Someone who knows what they are doing. Samuel felt the words settle in his chest, hitting the place where his own doubts lived. What happened after that? He asked softly. Evelyn brushed her thumb across Lily's arm, thoughtful. My mother came into the kitchen. She did not say much. She just lifted Molly from my arms, held her close, and said she is crying because you are trying so hard. Babies can feel love even when it feels messy and tired. Then she told me something I have never forgotten. She said you are not a bad mother. You are simply the only one still standing. Samuel felt a quiet warmth move through him, the kind of warmth that came from hearing a truth that fit perfectly into the empty places in his heart. The only one still standing, he repeated softly. Evelyn nodded. I held on to those words for a long time. They got me through the nights when everything felt impossible. When I thought I was failing her. When I thought I was failing myself. She looked up, meeting Samuel's eyes. You remind me of that. The way you held Lily earlier. The way you kept whispering to her even when you were exhausted. You may not feel steady, Samuel, but your daughter sees you trying. Children feel that. More than anything else, they feel effort. Samuel swallowed, the emotion rising unexpectedly in his throat. He had spent so many nights questioning every choice, every step, every gentle rock of the cradle. Hearing her words felt like someone had laid a soft blanket over the cold parts of his heart. Thank you, he said quietly. I do not hear things like that often. Evelyn offered him a small smile. Most parents do not. We are all too busy trying to hold everything together. She looked back out the window, her voice settling into something warm and sure. Trying does not make us weak. Trying is the strongest thing we do. The plane continued toward Portland, cutting through the night with quiet certainty. And in that small patch of light above the dark world below, Samuel felt just a little less alone than he had when the flight began. For a long moment, neither Samuel nor Evelyn spoke. The hush that had settled over their small corner of the cabin felt almost sacred, as if breaking it too quickly would scatter something fragile between them. Lily slept soundly in Evelyn's arms, her tiny breaths forming a soft rhythm that kept the silence warm rather than empty. Across the aisle, Molly shifted in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like a half-formed dream. Her stuffed lamb slipped a little from her grasp, and Samuel watched as Evelyn instinctively reached out with her free hand to secure it, the motion so natural that it held its own kind of grace. You do that like you have been doing it all your life, Samuel murmured. Evelyn smiled gently. Some days it feels like I have. Other days it feels like I'm still learning everything from the beginning. Samuel nodded slowly. I know that feeling. Their eyes met, and for the first time since the plane lifted off from Denver, Samuel felt something quiet and steady inside him. Not relief exactly, and not hope either. More like recognition. The kind of feeling that comes when two travelers realize they have been walking neighboring paths for a long time without ever seeing each other. My mother used to say that grief makes the world quieter, Evelyn said softly. Not because there is less noise, but because you start hearing different things. She glanced down at Lily. You start hearing what matters. Samuel let the words linger. He understood them in a way he wished he did not. When Caroline died, the world had grown painfully silent. Friends spoke softly around him as though loud voices might break him. Family tried to help, but their kindness often felt like pity wrapped in gentle hands. Nights were the worst when Lily slept, and the apartment was too still, too full of echoes of what should have been. I used to hate the quiet, Samuel admitted. It made everything feel bigger. The pieces of grief, the empty room, the things I did not know how to do. But now, he paused, searching for the right words. He had not spoken about this to anyone. Not really. His voice softened. Now, the quiet feels like a place where I can hear her. Caroline, I mean. Not with words, but in small things. When Lily reaches for my hand. When she laughs in her sleep. when I remember something Caroline once said about how a baby knows its parents long before its parents know themselves. Evelyn nodded with slow understanding. That is how it was with my mother. She was everywhere in our house. In the tea mugs she collected, in the recipes she wrote out in her careful handwriting, in the worn apron hanging by the back door. After she passed, those things made me cry for days. But last week, Evelyn swallowed, steadying her voice. Last week I realized they were not there to hurt me. They were there to remind me of all the love she planted in us. Samuel felt the air shift gently around them, like the two stories were weaving together, stitch by careful stitch. I think Evelyn said softly that people like us carry loss differently. Not because we are stronger, but because we have little ones who look at us like we hung the moon. We keep going because stopping is not an option. Samuel breathed in the truth of her words. Parenting alone was not a choice either of them had asked for. Yet here they were holding on for their daughters, carrying grief in one arm and hope in the other. You know, Samuel said slowly, I never thought I would meet someone who understood. Really understood. Most people try, but it is not the same unless you have lived it. Evelyn gave him a look filled with quiet tenderness. Maybe we were meant to sit in these seats tonight. Maybe this was the only place in the world where our stories could meet. Samuel let out a soft breath, not quite a sigh, not quite a prayer. For the first time in months, he felt less like a solitary figure drifting through the world, and more like a man who had found someone standing in the same storm. Lily stirred in Evelyn's arms, her tiny fingers tightening briefly around the fabric of her sleeve, before relaxing again. Evelyn smiled down at her, then looked up at Samuel. Maybe, she said gently, loneliness is lighter when someone else knows its shape. And Samuel realized she was right. In that dimly lit cabin high above the world, surrounded by strangers, two tired hearts had quietly found each other. The lights in the cabin brightened slightly as the pilot announced their descent. A faint rustle moved through the rows as passengers straightened in their seats, cleared their trays, and prepared to leave the quiet cocoon that had carried them across the evening sky. The spell of the flight, delicate as it was, began to loosen. Lily stirred against Evelyn's shoulder, letting out a soft sigh. Her tiny fingers curled and uncurled as if she were waking from a dream. Evelyn smiled down at her, brushing a gentle hand across her back before carefully shifting her weight. She is waking, she whispered to Samuel. He nodded and lifted his arms, ready to take his daughter back. Their fingers brushed as Evelyn passed Lily to him, a small touch, but warm enough to travel up his spine. He held Lily close, breathing in her familiar baby scent, grateful for the peace those few minutes had given both of them. Thank you, he said softly. I do not know how to put into words how much that meant. Evelyn gave a modest smile, the kind that suggested she did not see her actions as extraordinary. You do not have to thank me. Sometimes helping is the only thing that feels right. Her words lingered between them, warm and sincere. Samuel looked at her closely, noticing again the tiredness in her eyes, the kind that ran deeper than a sleepless night. She had carried more than grief on this flight. She had carried responsibility, fear, memories, and something fragile that looked a little like hope. The plane landed with a soft bump, rolling to a slow crawl along the runway. People unbuckled their belts before the light blinked off. Overhead, bins creaked open. The usual impatience of deplaning rose like a returning tide. Samuel shifted Lily to one arm and reached for their small diaper bag. Before he could stand, Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his forearm. Wait a moment, she said softly. Let the rush pass. He paused, settling back into his seat as the crowd pressed forward. Evelyn reached into her tote bag, rummaging past stray crayons, tissues, and a small paperback with its cover bent. Finally, she pulled out a simple receipt from a grocery store in Astoria. She took a pen from the pocket of her sweater and wrote slowly, her hand steady. Samuel watched her, unsure what she was doing, but unable to look away. When she finished, she turned the slip of paper between her fingers and hesitated. Not out of uncertainty, but out of care, as if she understood the weight a small gesture could carry. I do not want you to feel any pressure, she said quietly. Truly. You have carried enough these past months, and I know I am not in a place to offer anything certain right now." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes held firm. "I just wanted you to have this, in case you find yourself needing a warm place someday, or a familiar face." She held out the paper. Samuel took it gently, smoothing the corner with his thumb. The simple handwriting read Blue Harbor Caf, Willow Avenue, Astoria, Oregon. No phone number. No expectation. Just a place. A door left unlocked. He swallowed emotion, thickening his voice. "Thank you, Evelyn. I appreciate this more than you know." Evelyn nodded as Molly began to stir in her row, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. She turned to gather her daughter, tucking the lamb back into her arms. When she looked back at Samuel, her smile was small, but real. Whatever this moment is, it does not have to be more than kindness. Sometimes that is enough. The aisle finally cleared, leaving only a handful of passengers. Samuel stood with Lily in his arms, tucking the slip of paper carefully into his pocket. He did not know what might come of it. He only knew it felt like someone had quietly opened a window in a room he thought would stay closed forever. As they stepped into the aisle, Evelyn said softly, "Take care of yourself, Samuel Harper. You too, Evelyn Brooks." Then they parted ways, carried forward by the slow-moving line of strangers, yet leaving behind a moment that neither would forget. The days that followed the flight slipped back into the familiar rhythm Samuel knew too well. Morning began before dawn, long before the world outside even considered waking. Lily always stirred first, her small voice calling out with soft sounds that slowly grew into gentle insistence. Samuel rose with the same quiet determination each day, warming a bottle, rocking her in the worn glider chair by the window, whispering to her about the morning light that would soon filter through the blinds. Life had a way of returning to its routines, even when a man felt changed in ways he could not name. Samuel went back to work at the plumbing shop, tightening old pipes, replacing faucets in kitchens that smelled of cinnamon or bleach, driving from one job to another across neighborhoods he barely paid attention to. People greeted him with friendly nods, asked about Lily, and told him he was doing a good job. Their words were kind, but they never went deep enough to reach the ache tucked behind his ribs. Every night when the house finally fell quiet, Samuel would open his wallet. There, tucked behind his driver's license, and a faded picture of Caroline holding her pregnant belly, was the small grocery receipt. Blue Harbor Caf, Willow Avenue, Astoria. The ink was slightly smudged at one corner where his thumb had brushed it too often. He never took the paper out completely. He would just look at it, letting the familiar shape of the folded slip calm him in a way he did not quite understand. There was something comforting about knowing it was there. A place of possibility, a soft gesture from a tired stranger with gentle hands. Sometimes in the middle of the night when Lily cried and would not settle, when Samuel paced the living room with her against his shoulder and whispered every word he could think of, he would remember the way Evelyn had held her. The steady confidence in her arms, the quiet hum of the melody that had soothed Lily in minutes. The softness in her eyes when she looked at him, as if she recognized the exhaustion he tried to hide from the world. He tried not to think about the flight too often, but it slipped into his thoughts anyway. In the grocery store line, during lunch breaks at work, when he washed Lily's bottles at the sink, when he stared at the empty chair across from him at dinner. He remembered the warmth in Evelyn's voice when she said sometimes kindness is enough. He remembered the look she gave him when she passed Lily back into his arms. He remembered the way her name sounded when he spoke it. Evelyn Brooks. 7 months passed, though, to Samuel. They felt both endless and too fast. Lily learned to sit up on her own then, to crawl across the living room floor with determined little hands that slapped the hardwood softly as she moved. She began babbling new sounds, strings of syllables that made no sense but filled the house with a life that felt like sunlight after winter. Lily Harper was growing. Samuel could see pieces of Caroline in her smile and the shape of her eyes, and sometimes that made his heart ache in a bittersweet way. But the laughter, the sparkle in her gaze, the curiosity as she explored everything around her. Those things were all her own. Still, the nights were hard. The loneliness pressed against the windows, settled into the corners of the room, and crept into Samuel's chest when the house became too quiet. On those nights, he always reached for his wallet. Sometimes he opened it without even realizing. His fingers knew their way to the folded slip of paper. He would huff a small breath of disbelief at himself, wondering why he had not thrown it away, why he had not convinced himself it meant nothing more than a kind gesture from someone he might never see again. But he never tossed it. He could not. Because every time he looked at that little receipt, he remembered something he had not felt in a long time. He remembered that for a brief, gentle moment above the clouds, he had not felt alone. Willow Avenue wound gently through the heart of Astoria, lined with old trees that bent their branches over the road like quiet guardians. On certain mornings when the fog rolled in from the Columbia River, the whole street looked like something out of a memory rather than a map. It was a place where time slowed, where people greeted each other by name, where cafés smelled of cinnamon and warm bread long before the first customer arrived. And for 7 long months, Samuel Harper found himself driving to that street more times than he could explain. He never planned the trips. They simply happened. Some mornings after dropping Lily off at daycare, Samuel would find the truck turning toward the river instead of heading to the shop. On quiet Sundays, he would buckle Lily into her car seat, telling himself they were just taking a drive, exploring, showing her new places, clearing his own head. But the truth was simpler. His heart knew its way to Willow Avenue even when his mind pretended otherwise. Blue Harbor Cafe always came into view the same way, its soft green awning stretching over the windows, flower boxes spilling color in every season, the hand-painted sign gently swaying with the wind. Through the front window, Samuel could sometimes see silhouettes moving inside. Someone pouring coffee, someone wiping the counter. The glow of warm light against the cool Oregon air. He always slowed the truck when he passed. But he never stopped. Lily, strapped in her seat behind him, would babble and kick her feet in delight at the changing scenery. Sometimes she pressed her small hand against the window, fascinated by the movement outside. Samuel looked at her in the rearview mirror and felt that familiar tug in his chest. Maybe today, he would think. Maybe this is the day I go in. He would pull over across the street, parking beneath the old willow tree with its branches hanging low like a curtain of leaves. He would sit there for minutes at a time, watching families step in and out of the cafe. He would watch couples sharing pastries, elders reading newspapers, a teenager scribbling homework at a corner table. Every now and then he caught a glimpse of someone behind the counter, but he could never be sure if it was her. He wondered how Evelyn was doing. He wondered if Molly's laugh still carried the same sweetness he remembered. He wondered if 7 months was long enough for strangers from a plane to fade completely from someone else's world. He told himself she had her own life to rebuild, a daughter to raise, a mother to mourn, a calf to help keep running. He told himself he had no place stepping into all of that. Still, Samuel returned again and again, visiting the street, like a quiet ritual he did not speak of to anyone. Sometimes he parked long enough to see the first morning customers walk in. Other days only long enough to catch a glimpse of the chalkboard sign with its daily special. Once he saw a child outside drawing with sidewalk chalk. A little girl with dark curls. His heart stopped for a moment before he realized it wasn't Molly, just a neighbor child playing in the sunshine. He exhaled, both relieved and disappointed. There were mornings when he nearly stepped out of the truck. He would unbuckle Lily, lift her into his arms, and open the door, only to feel uncertainty gather around him like a thick fog. What if Evelyn did not remember him? What if the connection he felt had lived only in his own memory? What if walking in reopened something she had already gently closed, so he would settle Lily back into her seat, murmur, "Not today, sweetheart," and drive away? But every time he left Willow Avenue, the little slip of paper in his wallet seemed to weigh just a bit more. Not like a burden, more like a reminder. A reminder that kindness had been offered once. A reminder that someone had seen him when he felt invisible. a reminder that the world could still surprise a man who thought his stories of new beginnings had ended. And though Samuel never walked through the caf door, a quiet truth remained: he kept returning to that street for a reason his heart understood long before he did. The morning of Lily's first birthday began quietly, the way most important days do. Dawn crept in through the blinds, leaving soft lines of gold across the nursery floor. Lily woke with a cheerful babble, patting the rails of her crib with tiny hands, as if announcing that this day, this moment belonged to her. Samuel stood in the doorway for a long, breathtaking in the sight of his daughter's bright eyes and rosy cheeks. 1 year. It hardly seemed possible. 12 months of late nights and early mornings. 12 months of learning how to hold her, soothe her, feed her, and read the quiet meanings in her small sounds. 12 months of missing Caroline with a tenderness that still surprised him. He lifted Lily into his arms and whispered, "Happy birthday, sweet girl." She rested her head briefly on his shoulder before lifting it again, eager to start her day. Samuel dressed her in the little yellow dress covered with dainty white daisies. It had been a gift from Caroline's mother, sent with a handwritten note that said, "She'll shine in this." Samuel smiled at that thought. Caroline had always believed their daughter would bring light wherever she went. After breakfast, he buckled Lily into her car seat. She giggled as he secured the straps, kicking her feet in excitement, as if sensing something new. Samuel stepped back, exhaled deeply, then nodded to himself. There was no plan this time, no excuse of errands or casual drives. Today he was going to the café. The drive to Astoria felt different that morning. The sky was clear and the river shimmered with a quiet grace that made the whole town feel gentler than usual. Lily watched the passing scenery with wide eyes, laughing each time a bird swooped low over the windshield. Samuel found himself smiling, too carried by a quiet courage he had not known he still held. When Willow Avenue appeared framed by its arching trees, Samuel's heart quickened. The familiar green awning of Blue Harbor Caf came into view, sunlight glinting softly off its windows. He slowed the truck, parking beneath the same willow tree he had sat under so many times before. The leaves rustled above him as if urging him forward. He turned off the engine and looked at Lily. She pressed her tiny palm against the glass, staring at the caf, as if she knew it meant something, as if she had been waiting for this day too. "What do you think?" Samuel asked softly. "Should we go in?" Lily blinked up at him, then announced with cheerful clarity, "More." It was the same word she had used when she first learned to ask for something she liked. It was the same word she whispered before drifting off to sleep when she wanted one more song. One more comfort. And now somehow it felt like an answer. Samuel laughed, surprised by the warmth rising in his chest. "All right," he murmured. "If you say so." He lifted Lily out of the car, her yellow dress fluttering lightly in the breeze. Together they crossed the street. The steps felt lighter than he expected. Not easy, but purposeful, like stepping toward a door he was finally ready to open. The bell above the cafe's entrance chimed softly when he pushed the door. The smell of fresh bread and warm coffee filled the air, wrapping around him like an old blanket. The chatter of morning customers blended with the gentle clink of dishes, creating a hum that felt unexpectedly comforting. And then he saw her. Evelyn Brooks stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, her apron dusted with flour. She was laughing at something an elderly man said, her smile warm and unguarded. The sight of her laughter, so alive and unburdened, made Samuel's heart shift in a way he could not quite explain. He almost turned away, almost let fear grab him by the shoulders and pull him back out the door. But Lily made a soft, curious sound in his arms, a sound that steadied him. He stepped forward. The bell had already announced him, yet Evelyn had not turned around. But someone else had. In the far corner of the room, a little girl with dark curls and a familiar stuffed lamb looked up from her coloring book. Her eyes widened. Her mouth fell open in surprise. "Mommy," she gasped, pointing with excited urgency. "Mommy, it's the airplane man." And just like that, the moment began. For a moment, the entire caf seemed to pause. The gentle clatter of plates softened, Conversation dipped. Even the hum of the espresso machine seemed to grow quieter. Samuel felt his breath catch as every eye in the room turned toward the small voice coming from the corner. Molly stood beside her table, clutching her stuffed lamb, her curls bouncing as she practically vibrated with excitement. Her bright eyes were locked on Samuel, unblinking, certain. "Mommy," she repeated louder this time. "It's the airplane man. And baby Lily." Evelyn stiffened at the counter. The coffee pot in her hand wobbled slightly. She turned slowly, as if she were afraid the moment might dissolve if she moved too fast. Her braid slid over her shoulder as she searched the café, her gaze sweeping across the room until it found him. The look on her face was something Samuel knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Surprise first, wide and disbelieving. Then something deeper. Something like a long breath finally released after being held too long. Samuel stood there holding Lily, feeling strangely unmoored. He had imagined this moment hundreds of times in the quiet of his apartment, yet none of those imagined scenes had prepared him for the real thing, for the way Evelyn's eyes softened, for the way Molly nearly bounced with joy, for the way his own heart felt like it had stepped toward something he had not dared to name. Evelyn stepped out from behind the counter, hands trembling as she wiped flour from her apron. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. When she finally stood only a few feet from him, she whispered, "You came." Samuel nodded, his voice caught somewhere between relief and fear. "I nearly didn't. About a dozen times." Evelyn let out a breath that sounded like a soft laugh and a quiet cry woven together. She reached out as if to touch Lily's hand, then pulled back, unsure. Before she could speak again, Lily made a small sound, a soft, questioning hum. She reached out with both hands, leaning forward in Samuel's arms, her eyes fixed entirely on Evelyn. Then Lily said it. "Ma." Not in the clear voice of older children, but in that soft, instinctive way babies use when they reach toward comfort, toward familiarity, toward something that feels safe. The words slipped into the air like a fragile note. Evelyn froze. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears gathered, instantly shimmering at the corners of her eyes. She looked at Samuel as though asking silently whether she had imagined it. Samuel swallowed hard. I don't know where she learned it," he said softly. "But she started making that sound at night, a few weeks after the flight. I didn't understand what it meant. Not until now." Evelyn blinked against tears and stepped closer. Her hands hovered near Lily, trembling with tenderness and disbelief. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "You remember me, don't you?" Lily leaned toward her again, arms outstretched. Samuel hesitated only a moment before gently transferring his daughter into Evelyn's waiting arms. Their fingers brushed again, and he felt the familiar warmth of her touch. Evelyn held Lily, close her breath, catching as the baby settled easily against her shoulder, as if she had simply returned to a place she already knew. Molly tugged on Samuel's sleeve, her eyes wide with hope. "Can she stay with us a while? Can we show her where the crayons or Samuel smile down at Molly?" "I think she would like that." Evelyn looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was my mother's lullaby I sang on the plane. The one Lily remembered. I didn't realize I had been humming it again last week in the evenings. Maybe she recognized it. Maybe she recognized me." Her words trembled, full of something tender and new. Samuel felt the truth settle deep in his chest. Not heavy. Not frightening. Just real. Maybe she did. For a long heartbeat, they stood there in the quiet glow of the café, two tired parents and two little girls whose paths had woven together long before either adult understood why. Outside, the morning light grew brighter. Inside, something long silent inside Samuel's heart shifted, opening like a window. Lily made another soft sound against Evelyn's shoulder. And this time, it was not a plea. It was a greeting. Evelyn held Lily as if she were rediscovering something precious she had once set down. The baby rested peacefully against her, one tiny hand clutching a fold of Evelyn's apron. The calf hummed softly around them, but the moment felt private, sacred, as though the world had stepped back for a breath to let these two souls recognize each other again. Samuel stood close, unsure whether to speak or simply let the moment stretch as long as it needed. He watched Evelyn's expression soften, watched her touch Lily's back with a tenderness that seemed to rise from a place deeper than memory. Molly, content and bursting with excitement, had already taken her crayons to the nearby table, confident that something important was unfolding, even if she did not understand all of it. Samuel finally said, "I didn't know if you'd remember us." Evelyn's eyes lifted to his, warm and shimmering. "I remembered," she whispered. "More than I wanted to admit." She shifted Lily slightly, brushing a gentle hand across the baby's cheek. After the funeral, after the long nights, she paused, steadying her breath. "I kept thinking about that flight. Not just because you were struggling, though anyone could see you were doing your best, but because it was the first time in months I felt like someone else understood the weight I was carrying." Samuel lowered his head slightly, feeling the truth of her words settle deep. "I understood more than I knew how to say back then." Evelyn smiled, small and sincere. "I figured as much. I saw it in the way you held her, and in the way you looked at me, not like I was doing something miraculous, but like you were relieved not to be alone for one moment." Her voice softened even more, and that meant something to me. Samuel felt his breath tighten. He had replayed that moment on the plane so many times, always stopping himself before letting the thought grow too large, too hopeful. To hear her say it now made the calf feel warmer, like sunlight filtering through an open door. Evelyn continued, her fingers tracing gentle circles on Lily's back. "After we landed, I wanted to talk to you longer. I wanted to ask how you were doing, how you were managing. But I was afraid that if I said too much, I might lean on you when you had your own world to carry." Samuel met her gaze. "We were both afraid, I think." She nodded. "Then the days passed, and grief has a way of pushing everything else aside." She brushed a tear that had quietly slipped down her cheek. "But every time Molly and I walked into this cafe, I wondered if you still had that little piece of paper. And I wondered if you wished you had thrown it away." Samuel felt something warm unfold inside him. "I kept it," he said simply. "Every day." A quiet breath left Evelyn's chest, almost like a soft release of relief she had held too long. "I hoped you did. I hoped something about that night meant as much to you as it did to me." She looked down at Lily again, her voice trembling with a deeper truth. "And when she said Ma just now, it felt like something inside me opened. Something I thought had closed forever. My mother used to say that children know things long before adults are brave enough to say them out loud." Samuel took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "Lily remembered your song. I heard her humming it at night. I didn't recognize it until I saw you today." Evelyn brought her hand to her mouth, eyes filling again. "That was my mother's lullaby. She used to hum it in the kitchen when she thought no one was listening. I didn't realize I still carry it in my voice. I didn't realize Lily had carried it with her." The moment held them both, gentle and full, like a fragile bridge built between two hearts that had long lived in separate shadows. Samuel spoke softly, the words coming from a place he hadn't touched in a long time. "Lily remembered you, and I did too. More than I expected." Evelyn lifted her gaze to his, and something unspoken passed between them, something warm, steady, and unmistakably alive. Then Molly, impatient with waiting, called out brightly, "Mommy, can Lily come draw now?" Lily let out a soft coo as if answering for herself. Evelyn laughed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I think she wants to." Samuel smiled, feeling the weight on his chest ease just a little more. And in that small cafe on Willow Avenue, something new, something fragile, hopeful and quietly beautiful began to grow between two people who had once been strangers on a plane. Molly had already claimed the corner table as her kingdom, spreading out crayons with the authority only a child could possess. She waved eagerly for Evelyn and Samuel to join her curls, bouncing with each excited nod. Lily reached her small arms toward the colorful mess, letting out a delighted sound that made Molly grin proudly as though she had personally invented happiness. Evelyn set Lily gently into a small wooden chair beside Molly, making sure the baby was steady before letting go. The girls settled quickly into their own small world, one drawing crooked circles, the other smacking crayons on the table with the seriousness of an artist at work. Samuel watched them, his heart warming at the sight. He had never imagined Lily would someday sit beside another child like this, comfortable, curious, unafraid. He had not imagined either that he would feel such ease standing beside someone who understood him without needing explanations. Evelyn moved to the table across from him, resting her hands on the back of a chair before easing into it. She seemed calmer now, though the shimmer of emotion still hovered around her eyes, softening her expression. "It feels strange," she murmured, "to have a moment like this, after months of feeling like I was moving through fog." Samuel understood better than she knew. Fog had filled his world for months after Caroline passed, thick and heavy, swallowing even the simplest joys. Yet here in the warm light of the café, the fog felt thinner. "I spent months keeping my world small," Samuel said quietly, dropping into the seat across from her. "Work. Home. Lily. Repeat." It was easier to stay inside that circle than risk letting anything else in. Evelyn nodded. "I know that feeling too well. After my mother's funeral, people kept telling me to get out more, that I needed to be around others. But I felt safest in the quiet, in the familiar." She glanced down at her hands. "Sometimes I think loneliness becomes a habit before we even notice." Samuel let her words settle. "Then he said you weren't meant to carry everything alone." "Neither were you," Evelyn answered gently, her eyes lifting to meet his. There it was again, that quiet recognition that passed between them, as warm and steady as a hand reaching through the dark. It made Samuel feel exposed in a way that wasn't frightening, only honest. "I was scared to come today," he admitted. "I must have driven past this place 100 times. Stopped across the street. Watched through the window. But every time something held me back." "What were you afraid of?" Evelyn asked softly. Samuel looked at Lily, her tiny fingers gripping a crayon as she scribbled a blue streak across the paper. Then he looked at Evelyn again. "I was afraid I'd built something in my mind that wasn't real. That what we shared on that flight was just a moment. Nice. Meaningful. But temporary." Evelyn's expression softened, a tender ache passing through her eyes. "It wasn't temporary to me," she said quietly. Samuel's breath caught. Evelyn folded her hands together, her fingers trembling slightly. "I haven't said this out loud," she continued, "but after that flight I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not romance exactly. Not hope either. Just the sense that I wasn't the only one living in the in-between. The space between grief and whatever comes after." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's exactly where I've been living too." Evelyn looked at him, then really looked at him, as if seeing not just the man sitting in front of her, but the weary road he had walked to reach this moment. "We're both carrying pieces of what we lost," she said. "But maybe we don't have to carry them alone anymore." Samuel swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling warm and heavy in his chest. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know what comes next." Evelyn's voice softened into something steady and sure. "Then we take it slow. One day at a time. One morning at this café at a time. No promises. No expectations. Just presence." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The fog around him felt thinner now. Not gone, but lighter. He glanced toward the girls. Molly had placed her little hand over Lily's, as if guiding her art, creating a tangle of crayon colors that looked more like joy than any picture ever could. Samuel turned back to Evelyn. "I'd like that," he said. Evelyn's smile was small, but it reached her eyes warm and real. "Me too." The morning sun drifted slowly across the caf floor, warming the wooden boards and giving the space a gentle glow. Customers came and went, offering polite smiles to Samuel and Evelyn as they passed, as if they sensed something tender unfolding without needing to understand it. The smell of fresh bread mingled with the faint sweetness of pastries cooling near the window. Time seemed to slow itself to match the rhythm of this small moment. Samuel watched Lily and Molly crouch together over their shared drawing crayons, scattered like tiny bright seashells between them. Molly held a purple crayon and traced slow, looping shapes, while Lily tapped the paper with her green one, proud of every mark she made. Their little shoulders pressed together, small and steady, the kind of closeness that children offered freely when the world felt safe. There was a softness in seeing them like that, as if fate had woven two little stories into one without waiting for permission. Mr. Thompson, the caf owner, wandered by with a warm grin, wiping his hands on his apron. "I see you found your way back," he said to Samuel with a friendly nod. "Good. Evelyn's mother used to say this place brings people where they need to be." Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening with the familiar ache of missing her mother. "She would have liked today," she murmured. "She always said life had a way of giving us small nudges when we least expected them." Samuel nodded, touched by the thought. Caroline used to say that too, in her own way, that love sometimes arrives in quiet moments, not grand ones. For a while they simply watched the girls. The sound of their giggles filled the caf like bells ringing softly in the distance. The comfort of the moment seeped into Samuel's bones, loosening places where fear had lived too long. When Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice was low, thoughtful. "You know, when my mother died, I thought the world had gone still. Everything felt dimmer. Even color." She paused, swallowing softly. "I never imagined we would have a morning like this again." Samuel leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I didn't imagine anything like this either. Or anyone." Her eyes lifted to his. It was not a romantic gaze, not yet. But it was full of something deeper, a beginning. A quiet recognition that two broken paths had gently begun leaning toward each other. "I don't know what happens from here," Samuel said, choosing his words with care. "I don't know how to do whatever this could be. But I know that watching Lily reach for you earlier felt like something I didn't want to run from." Evelyn brushed her thumb across the rim of her mug. "I don't know how to do this either. I'm scared. I'm tired. I'm still grieving." She looked toward the girls, but when I see them together, when I see you with her, she softened. "It makes something inside me feel steady again." Samuel breathed in slowly. "I don't need promises, Evelyn. And I don't have any to give, but I like to come back. Sit here. Talk. Let our girls grow up knowing each other. Build whatever we can, one small step at a time." Evelyn nodded, tears welling but not falling. "That sounds like something worth trying." Molly suddenly turned from the table, holding up their creation with the pride of a young artist, showing her first masterpiece. The paper was covered in strokes of green, purple, pink, and blue, a wild tangle of color. But if you looked closely, you could see 4 distinct shapes, 2 taller figures and 2 small ones between them. "Look, Mommy," Molly said brightly. "Look, we made a family." The simple truth in her voice hung in the air, soft but powerful. Samuel felt something loosen in his chest, a wall crumbling gently, not with pain, but with understanding. Lily clapped her hands, delighted at Molly's excitement. Evelyn pressed a hand to her heart, her voice catching as she whispered, "It's beautiful." They took the picture and placed it on the table between them. The colors seemed to glow in the morning light. The hope in it was unmistakable. Mr. Thompson leaned over from behind the counter. "You framed that," he said kindly. "One day you'll want to remember the moment it began." Evelyn laughed through tears. "We just might." As the girls returned to their crayons, Samuel and Evelyn sat together, not touching, but close enough that warmth traveled between them. Close enough to feel the quiet promise settling gently into place. Life had taken much from them. Grief had shaped them. Loneliness had walked beside them for too long. Yet here on an ordinary morning on Willow Avenue, surrounded by the comforting scent of coffee and the innocent chatter of children, something new was blooming. Not certainty. Not perfection. But possibility. The kind that grows when two tired hearts finally allow themselves to hope again. And as the caf door chimed softly with the next customer, Samuel reached across the table. Evelyn met him halfway. Their fingers intertwined slowly, carefully, intentionally. Lily looked up, saw their hands together, and smiled with a sweetness that carried her mother's light. "Family," she whispered. Samuel's throat tightened, but he smiled. "Yes, Lily." Maybe one day. Outside, the sun continued its gentle rise, blessing the small caf with warm, golden quiet. Inside, something long awaited finally found its place. And so a story of grief and kindness became a story of healing and beginning proof that sometimes love arrives quietly, carried in the arms of a child, offered through a stranger's kindness, and kept alive by two hearts willing to try again.